welcome to We the People Radio. NorCal Tea Party Patriots welcomes you today. Let me tell you what the Tea Party Patriots stand for. 3 core values: fiscal responsibility, constitutionally limited government, and the free markets. Quite simple. What makes us different from most of the other Tea Party groups that are out there, and that is that we are not a PAC or a political action committee. We are actually the only true grassroots movement out there in that we do not accept any funds from any of the political parties. None of them. We do not want to be beholden because, frankly, we believe they've all lost their way and need to be rallied back to our Constitution. I want to thank our sponsor, Dick Randall of the Lost Trail Ranch in Cupertino, for sponsoring our show today. He breeds and trains horses and is a devout conservative, a huge part of our battle to bring sanity back to Sacramento and Washington, D.C. Today we have a very interesting guest. His name is Colonel Michael Babich, and he's not only a colonel, but he is a doctor as well. He has spoken to our group on numerous occasions and at our rallies. If you were at our 9/11 rally, he did address us. He's the handsome guy in the military uniform that spoke that day. He has a wealth of information, and we appreciate him giving us his time. Thank you, Michael, for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me here.
Well, Michael, you're an expert on Fabian socialism. I've heard you speak on it several times, but so many of us have never heard that term, Fabian socialism. Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, certainly. Fabian socialism, in short, is achieved through evolution, not revolution. I think and others think it's the primary root behind, quote unquote, the enemy within the United States. And just so the listenership could know where the term comes from, Fabius was a general in the Roman army, and to attack Hannibal, he was outmanned and outstrengthed. And so in order to win the battle, it was through little hits from the side, from behind, and to weaken him until he can finally do a full assault. And so there we have Fabian socialism.
So how does this philosophy become a danger to us in the United States?
Well, it's a danger because of several important points related to this. It becomes entrenched in the fabric of our society with little notice. That's the first issue. And before we even say how dangerous it is, maybe we should define just a little bit. We think we know what socialism is, but I'd like to just refresh our memory on that. It's political and economic theory of productivity, distribution and exchange of goods, of ideas, wealth, that is owned and regulated by the community as a whole. And on the surface, that may sound fine to some people, but we can delve into that a little bit later, why it's an insipid thing, and that makes the point about Fabian socialism. It's hard to argue against the slow erosion of our liberties that are occurring through this. Then what's sovereignty? That's almost the opposite of it. It's the authority of a state to govern itself. And, of course, within that, we have individual sovereignty. So although it sounds socialistic to say the state is governing itself, but who runs the state in the way our Constitution has been set up? And the founders, which would be the 1776 group, and the framers, which would be those that developed the Constitution, saw that it was indeed we the people, as you mentioned at the top of the hour. So we the people are in charge of governing ourselves. Is that a community? Well, yes, but no, because we maintain individual sovereignty. And because of that, this undermines that sovereignty if you yield your rights to a central authority. And then we have other problems that are surface from that, because how do we yield that authority? I mean, look, we're marketable, and we have this TV age and the radio age. I mean, just think how much election has changed since the Nixon JFK debate, which I know only about 2% of your listenership remembers that, right? but it changed everything forever in the field of politics and marketing. I mean, you can get behind someone's subconscious. I know everybody here has listened to a tune and didn't even know it, and you're humming that tune, and you don't even like that song. Well, how did it get inside you and own you for a little bit? So we can market, and that's what we're running against. It's very difficult once these Fabian socialists become entrenched.
Well, now you were saying then that we're marketable, and so our rights and our liberty then become marketable, it sounds like. But what about those rights that are given to us by our Creator? Do we simply hand those over to a person rather than realizing that these rights come to us by God?
Well, I think that's the point. I mean, there always was a structure, even biblical structure, of organization, if you will. There's an order of Timothy, and it's discussed. But you still have your individual sovereignty, in which you're the only one answerable to you and your God. And so the idea is you put this in the hands of a group of people, and we've seen where the larger socialism has always failed in history, because in the end you end up with a lower middle class at best, with a few people in charge. And that's how some of this actually started as a concerted effort about a little less than a century ago, with some socialists involved in education, media, and eventually the military. And they said it would take 3 generations to change our mindset over to a corporate mindset.
I understand how this is on a political level, but when I see what's happening to the erosion of our country, it isn't just politically, it's the moral fiber of the country is also eroded. How does it play into that?
Well, if we have a slow erosion of even our local school control, I mean, as Jefferson had pointed out how important that education was. I mean, education is one of the fundamental ways in that we secure our freedoms as Americans. And, a person's evil is evil still, person good, So it's really still is up to the individual, but we don't want to relinquish our rights, as you pointed out. And really it takes the point of that education, that we secure our freedom as Americans through education, and education of all sorts. I don't mean just the formal education, but look how many hours are spent per day of a child in the school versus with family. And then we have a whole system set up, and it's evolved, if you will, over a couple of generations, in which we pull apart the family. So if you put like a circle together, you have parents at the top, draw the line around, have the child, draw the line around and say education, and that would be schools as the largest component, then draw the line back to the parent, meaning they become parents. Well, if you take the parents out of that cycle and say, now we need to have 2 cars, 3 cars, oh, we need to have this, and you can talk about how we changed over the several decades. And again, that's Fabian socialism. I could march in favor of women's rights, but under what unction? To tear away apart a family, or because women should have a right to vote? So it pulls it apart slowly, and so we lose our sovereignty, and we lose and the influence actually becomes more pronounced from the community into shaping our lives. And now those people are in politics, they're in government, they're in places of authority, they're in our schools, and we don't even know it. I mean, we're talking about good, well-meaning people. It doesn't matter left or right. We're all under this influence, just as I mentioned.
Okay, tell me how this has invaded our educational system and the impact that has had on not just the little minds, but the family.
Well, we wanted to, who are the they? There's actually a group called Fabian Socialists that formed in England in the 1880s. But besides a formal group or making concerted efforts to change us over, there's also the flow of the tide that you don't even know you're going along with it sometimes. And I'll see Republicans and Democrats voting opposite sometimes, and sometimes in agreement on policies that tear away at the family, because we need to know the enemy. Now I'll put my colonel hat on. You really need to know your enemy to win the war. It's one thing to have a battle, but the war. And you got to see where they're coming from. And so once you get into the education, about 80 to 100 years ago, you had Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Carnegies, etc. And I'm speaking from not conspiracy theorist aspect. This is in the National Archives. It's in newspaper articles you can actually look up in the library. The Library of Congress, by the way, has given me some of my data, as well as reading some key books by key authors, Dennis Cuddy being one of them. And they've done their research. And it was a concerted effort to get into the education, media, and the military. And with education, they knew if they could control the minds, you can control the soul, and you can control so much. TV can be a boon or a bane for us. Mobile phones, same thing. Well, that's pulling us away from each other as well. I mean, just look at the group when they're together and a phone rings. Who suddenly becomes lord over that little group, right? It used to be, that would be rude. But now the person almost feels rude. And I've interviewed many of my students. I also teach at vocational schools, and I'm UC Davis faculty as well. But when I talk to the students, they agree. There's this subtlety that's changed in the mindset. It hasn't been taught, but it's just the wave of this erosion in which they'll be in a group, the phone rings, and they almost feel rude to interrupt the person's phone call.
Yeah.
Let them answer the phone. The phone suddenly becomes lord of the group. And then a study was just reported last year in which we're losing our ability to connect thoughts, to flow from point A to B to point C now. And
I
so
thought that was old age.
that is that. Well, the youth are catching up with us now. With that interruption, technology is actually contributing to this, not in a concerted effort, oh, we're going to socialize with people, but because of the way we're raised, and it's become involved in education, and groupthink is more important than individual think. It has taken authority away from the house, from the family, in a subtle way. So if you have to solve problems as a group only, what about your individual? I mean, and how do you argue against that, folks, right? How about school requirements to graduate doing a group project, a community project? How can you argue against that? Well, I thought I was supposed to do it because it's from an inside-out change, not outside in. Don't force me to do something. We need to have this birth of a righteousness, if you will, to evoke change in our society.
Wow. What is it that we can do to change the tide of this destruction quickly? We'll have a break, but we can come back to it if you need to. But
well, I'll give you some bullet points, and then I'll expound on them as we have some time. First, understand your local politics and understand the officials' goals and objectives. We have to educate ourselves. How do we do it? It's not just reading newspapers, but perhaps understanding founders' arguments too, because if we agree that they were based on certain Judeo-Christian principles, but it wasn't proselytizing, it wasn't forcing a religion upon us, but it was based on certain core principles, then we need to get back to teaching and understanding what those principles were and what they were founded on. And finally, we have to look around and educate ourselves on these issues. Who is the enemy, and what is this socialism all about? And get our children to understand, why is this important? And ourselves. Why is it important that I need to know 32 degrees Fahrenheit is freezing? You say, well, that's trivial. That's nothing. Well, I've asked my students, and I can tell you that we're getting at the vocational school level, I only get 5 to 20% in any given class getting that right.
No.
And I give them the reasons why it's important as we go up to Nevada, going over black ice, temperature drops from 40 to 30. Guess what? Anticipate the ice. So there are many ways we need to be educators while we debate.
Wow. I have a good question for you after our break. Right now, we will be taking a break, but you are listening to We the People Radio right here on KTKZ. We will be right back with